Hey dudes and dudettes, boys and girls, it's me, E.H. Ivans, your Uncle Herbie, and this is another edition of The Dad You Wish You Had. In this episode, we're going to talk about drugs. What happens when your child tells you, or you discover, because you've been rooting through their drawers, which you shouldn't be doing, by the way, and you've discovered a bag of marijuana or perhaps something a little quote-unquote worse. How do you handle it with your children? Now, before I get into my advice, I'm going to share a little anecdote with you and come clean with you on a couple of things. The first is, I am a medical marijuana card holder and user, okay? And that is nothing new with me. I have smoked pot on and off since I was in junior high school, okay, in Pittsburgh at Mellon Junior High. Later at Beach High School in Miami Beach, I was a pot smoker then, I'm a pot smoker now. I use pot, I'm not high at this very moment, but I'm not above it, and I enjoy it, and I freely admit it. Now, I don't drink alcohol at all. Zero, zilch, none. So those of you who are now judging me because I'm a pot smoker, ask yourself, do you drink? I drink zero. You know, when they have those questions on forms when you go to the doctor, how many drinks a week do you drink? Zero, I don't drink it. And why do I not drink? It's not because I have any moral objection to it. I don't drink because I hate the taste of alcohol. For whatever reason, I was born without the gene structure in my mouth or whatever, I don't know quite how to phrase it, to where I like the taste of alcohol. To me, wine is grape juice spoiled. I would much rather buy a bottle of Welch's grape juice than drink a $1,000 bottle of fine French or California or wherever, Chile or Australia, red wine. Okay, I just don't. To me, it's just barely tolerable. I can't stand it. Okay, beer to me, I don't know what urine tastes like, but if you carbonated it, I imagine it would taste like beer because that's how it tastes to me. I don't care if it's an IPA or whatever. I've had more people tell me, try this one, you're going to like it. Try this one. Try this one. Try this one. I just think it's puke. Okay, the only alcoholic drinks I can drink when I do drink them, which is like once every 10 years, is like a pina. Well, the last time I enjoyed a drink was in Hawaii at the Orchid Resort, which is now I think the Ritz-Carlton, okay? And I was sitting by the pool with my then wife Terry drinking lava flows, which is a pina colada with grenadine poured on the side so it looks like there's lava coming down the side of the glass. You kind of get the feeling. Anyway, it was so sweet and sugary I didn't taste the vodka inside, and that's the only way I can tolerate alcohol. If it's so sweet and sugary that I can't taste anything else, but then I get fat, and so I don't want to do that, so I don't drink. Okay, so I'm a pot smoker, not a drinker, because like everybody else, I enjoy checking out now and then. And let's be adults about this. We as adults, whether you have a cocktail at the end of the day or whether you smoke pot, we do it because we enjoy checking out for a little while. Let's not go into politically correct explanations, for health benefits or for pain or whatever it might be. For when you get a medical marijuana card, you have to tell. And I do factually, I have fairly significant arthritis in my left shoulder, my neck, but I could treat it without smoking pot. It does give me some relief, but the real reason I smoke pot is I enjoy checking out for an hour or two. I don't know about you, but I'm sure that those of you who come home at the end of the day and have a drink, do it because it takes the edge off the day. Life isn't a party. We like to believe that life is going to be a party, but it isn't. So anyway, this brings me around to how to discuss drugs and alcohol intelligently with your children, okay? And my number one piece of advice is don't be a hypocrite. The kids see you drinking, okay, and or smoking pot. So I'm going to share with you a little anecdote of how I came by accident to have what I think is an intelligent way to handle drugs with your children. And this dates back to my divorce. So after we got divorced, Terry and I had, as I related to you in an earlier video, the friendliest divorce in history. We had one attorney. I had submitted to a forensic accounting. We had divided all our assets up 50-50. I was happily and proudly paying child support and alimony. I considered it a badge of honor. We had literally the friendliest divorce in the history of divorces, really. I mean, I'm sure there are some that are tied with us, but nobody better. I mean, to this day, Terry and I get along great. Now, I point this out because it's the setup of the story. So after we got divorced, by the way, which I've also divulged, caused by my own poor actions. Good decisions comes from experience, but experience comes from bad decisions. This was a bad decision on my part, but it caused our divorce. But subsequent to that, and we had repaired our friendship, if not our intimate relationship. And so I bought a house less than a mile away from my old home where Terry lived, and the children went back and forth. We had joint custody. Now, unlike a lot of couples that fight it out and slug it out in divorce, we didn't have a set schedule for this. We just kind of had an informal agreement on the day, the kids would be with her one week and me the next week, but we were both open to grabbing the kids for each other if we had something else in the way. So for example, Terry is a physical therapist and is also a yoga instructor. If she had a class or she had something she had to do, I would watch the kids, even if it was her week, and vice versa with me in business. And we were both there for the kids all the time, as I've talked about in the past. So we had a very, very open relationship. Now, this went on. We got divorced when my oldest kids were already adults by the time we got divorced in 2004. My younger kids were still little and pre-adolescent. So anyway, yada, 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 time goes by, and I just forgot that Julian, my youngest son, and the older of the two youngest children, there's Julian and Chloe. Julian this year is going to be 30, Chloe's 26. Julian turned 16 and was driving, and somehow this just didn't register with me. And it was the week that they were supposed to be with their mom, and I was at my house, and I was in those days, this was prior to legal marijuana. Yes, I openly broke the law. I had a guy that was a friend of mine, I won't use his name now, I don't think there's any way he could get into trouble, but I'm not going to. But he was a guy that I knew from Trader Joe's. I used to shop at Trader Joe's, and I made a pot connection there and bought my pot from this guy that worked at Trader Joe's. And I smoked marijuana, but only when my kids weren't around. When they were with me, I did not. I presented what I call the modern hypocritical example of how a parent handles drugs and or alcohol at home. I pretended like I didn't do it when in fact I was. But that all came to a crashing end when Julian started driving. I thought they were at their mom's that particular day. I forget what day of the week it was. It's irrelevant to the story. I smoked a bunch of pot inside my house. I basically hotboxed the house. Those of you who smoke pot know exactly what I'm talking about. And I went to bed. And before I went to bed, I set the perimeter alarm system on my house. So those of you who have alarm systems know you can set your alarm just on the perimeter so you can walk around and not set off the motion detectors inside the house. But all the windows and doors are wired in case someone comes in to try to get you in your sleep. It's a little paranoid, really, but that's what I did. So I set the paranoid alarm. I set the perimeter alarm. See, that was what we call the Freudian slip. I set the paranoid perimeter alarm, and I went to bed. And I was stoned, okay? And it was, I don't know what time, it was fairly early, 9:30, 10 o'clock. Anyway, those of you who have an alarm are going to know this. All of a sudden, I'm woken up out of my sleep with the beep, 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 beep. The sound of what the alarm makes for about 90 seconds to give you time to get to the keypad and turn it off before it goes completely, berserk and starts with the sirens and the alarms and calling the police. So I hear the beep, 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 and then I hear the beep, 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 beep of someone keying into the code. And even in my marijuana-addled brain, I knew that the jig was up. So I stumbled out of my room, and there were my two children, 16 and 12, in the hallway, laughing hysterically. I said, "What's so funny?" with my bloodshot eyes and my wild hair. And Julian said, "Daddy's a stoner." Now, that immediately told me a couple of things. The first is Julian knows what marijuana smells like. So obviously he had been around marijuana before, and that realization came to me right away. Otherwise, how would he know Daddy was a stoner? By the smell. And that Chloe, my 12-year-old, also knew what the smell was, told me a lot as well. So I decided in that moment to have an adult discussion with my children about pot. Now, I'm not going to get into that whole discussion here, but I'm going to give you the overview of how I would handle it if you discover your child is smoking pot and you are vociferously opposed to it. Now, look, I'm not here to tell you that drugs are good or bad. They just are. Okay? And I'm also here to tell you that unless you're extremely unusual, you are a drug user just like the rest of us. Either you're drinking or you're smoking pot or doing something else. Now, there's two ways to handle this. You can try the prohibition method, which is to say, put your foot down, be a hypocrite, pretend like you don't drink when you're telling your kids not to smoke pot, and this will not be lost on them, in my opinion. They are not stupid, okay? Your children know what a hypocrite looks like. They may not say anything, but they're not going to stop smoking pot. They're going to smoke pot anyway. So I decided that I'd rather that they smoke pot around me. So here's the compromise we came up with. We had a very adult discussion about drugs. And when I say an adult discussion, a very adult discussion, this is basically what I told them. Pardon me for playing with my nose, I'm just scratching it. It is the mainstream belief that all drugs are bad and that pot is a gateway drug that leads to addiction, and every other drug, if you use it, you're going to be an addict. And this is simply not true. And this is what I told my children. The truth is, over the years, you can experiment with drugs and not become an addict. Because addiction is, and this is, again, I'm going to stop saying this over and over. I'm just going to say this now once and for all, and then I'm going to get to the end of my thought. Addiction, in my opinion, is the medication of self-loathing. It's the unprescribed medication of self-loathing. Now, you guys can argue with me on this, but this is the dad you wish you had. I'm giving dad advice. The first thing I told my children, I tell you, is that addiction is the unprescribed medication of self-loathing. It's not a disease. It's not an airborne virus. It's not a failure of character. It's a sad person trying to check out for a little while. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we in our culture have made it into a bad thing. Now, and again, I'm talking to you like I'm talking to my children. So I said, over the years, I'm going to be honest with you kids, from the time I was in high school or even junior high school to today, I smoked pot. And along the way, I tried other drugs as well. Way back in the day, I tried Quaaludes. Now, those of you who don't know what Quaaludes are, I invite you to rent the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, and you'll see what Quaaludes do. Okay, Quaaludes were, frankly, a fun drug. Okay, and I used Quaaludes extensively when I was in college. Okay, and also along the way, I dropped a lot of acid, and I did mushrooms over the years, from time to time. When I say a lot, not every day or every week or every month, but a couple of times a year, I'd get together with friends in Miami Beach. The first time I dropped acid, the thing about LSD acid is that it lasts, at least for me, about 8 hours. You can't. It's not like marijuana that wears off after an hour or two. It really goes on for a long time. So you want to make sure you're in a safe, quiet environment with a friend to be there, and so on and so forth, in case you have what is colloquially known as a bad trip. By the way, a bad trip, I never had one. A bad trip is kind of like a mean drunk. LSD will seize whoever you are underneath and bring it to the surface. And, I'm basically silly and jolly by nature, so I never had a bad trip. My trips were always great, but people that have bad trips they're people who are probably going to end up medicating self-loathing, to be perfectly honest. But anyway, I digress. So in this discussion, I admitted to the kids I tried all these drugs, and to be honest, a lot of these drugs are illegal, but for no good reason. For example, nobody's ever died of an LSD overdose, and nobody becomes an LSD addict, but yet LSD is illegal, although today it's starting to come back because they've discovered it's actually great for mental health. But anyway, I said to the kids, look, along the way, you're going to experiment with other drugs besides just pot. It's just me recognizing the reality. Now, I understand there are those of you out there as parents that are appalled at this the minute I say it, because you think I'm giving permission for bad behavior. There is no bad or good. There is only what happens if you become an addict. Since my children loved themselves because their mother and father, myself and my ex-wife, together reinforced to them that they are valuable, wonderful people without a hint of self-loathing, I'm happy to say that all 4 of my children, none of them are self-loathing, therefore none of them are addicts. Consequently, I wasn't worried about them becoming addicts. I know who becomes an addict, and it wasn't going to be my kids. My kids were going to experiment. So the question was, how are they going to experiment, and where are they going to experiment, and how safe are they going to be when they experiment? I didn't make it wrong. I said to them, look, what you don't want to do is make drugs the center of your life, and what you don't want to do is experiment foolishly. So if you're going to do it, just don't make a habit of it. Make sure you're in a safe place, and party on. And by the way, now that I know that you know what pot is and you've done it, if you're going to smoke pot, do it with your friends around me. I made my house a safe pot zone. Now, in order to not run afoul of other parents, okay, I actually did talk to the parents of other kids that did smoke pot or were going to smoke pot around my kids when they would have a party and so on and so forth, and get their acquiescence on this, so that the parents, I do nothing behind anybody's back. And if a parent said no, then it's no, then there will be no pot. If it's either all for one or none, okay, when it comes to these kind of things. But basically, I made my house a safe place where my kids could smoke pot, frankly, right in front of me. And eventually my ex-wife, who at first opposed the idea, came along with it, and yada, yada, yada today. Like I said, 30 and 26. And my older kids are 42 and 40 respectively. All of us use marijuana from time to time. None of us are addicts. And this does not mean, there's no such thing as a marijuana addict. We use it occasionally. Now, do we use other drugs? I myself do not anymore. I haven't done acid in years and years. Although if it became legal again, I probably would try it again. But I know that, for example, Julian and Chloe have both tried MDMA and whether it was ecstasy or Molly. And again, they've gone to Burning Man, and they've gone to what's that one out there? Starts with a C, outside of Palm Springs. It'll come to me. And anyway, they go to these festivals, and it's part of the experience, okay? And what I don't do is make it wrong or make it forbidden fruit. When you make something forbidden fruit, you drive your kids to it, guys. I hate to tell you that. And even heroin, I've never tried heroin. I don't recommend it. Can be experimented with. I'll tell you another quick story. Not everyone, and this is just not everyone becomes an addict. For years and years and years, I suffered from terrible migraine headaches. And they were so bad that occasionally I would have to go to the hospital. Now, this one, and by the way, just as a little sideline on the story, you have to know to understand this, my best friend was my doctor, okay? His name was Donald. And and by the way, for whatever reason, I outgrew them. I don't get them anymore. I haven't gotten that migraine headache in over a decade. But anyway, it's probably 1999 to 2000. Anyway, I got a terrible, terrible migraine headache, and as luck would have it, Donald was out of town. So I called him up, and he said to me, look, I'm out of town. This is when I lived in Tucson, Arizona. Go to Tucson Medical Center. I will call the emergency room ahead of time. They'll be waiting for you, and they'll give you something to kill the pain. Almost in tears, if you've ever had a bad migraine, it was so bad I was actually whacking my head into the wall to like block the pain from other pain, or pulling my own. That was a big one. I used to like to pull my own hair or scratch really hard to try to block the inputs of the pain, just like rubbing your arm if it's sore and so on and so forth, the same basic principle. Anyway, Terry drove me to the hospital. Sure enough, they were waiting for me. They took me inside and they gave me a shot of a drug called Dilaudid. Now, Dilaudid, in case you don't know what that is synthetic heroin. It does everything heroin does. It's simply made in a lab, not grown on a poppy. Now, this is like 20 years ago, but I can tell you for a fact that even as I'm sharing this to you, I remember I was sitting in a chair and the nurse injected the Dilaudid into my left arm. And I remember that as she depressed the plunger on the syringe, this feeling of warmth and well-being washed up over me and came over my whole body, and the pain just went poof. And I felt literally the best I ever felt in my entire life. I never felt so good. I have never felt so good since. I felt perfect, not an ounce of pain. The whole world was a sunny place. I felt like literally I was on cloud nine. I thanked the nurse for the injection, and I left the hospital with Terry. As we walked out the door, I turned to Terry and I said, well, I feel great, but I'll never do that again. And she said, what's wrong? I said, oh, I'll never take another shot of Dilaudid. She said, why, are you having a reaction? I said, no, I'm not going to use it again because I like it. And that's the thing. You have to have the ability, and this comes from good upbringing and two parents at home and raising a kid with a strong self-image, to be able to say no. I mean, I knew that Dilaudid was too good. I mean, marijuana, as nice as it is not perfect. You still occasionally hack your lungs out, and it's not a perfect. There's no hallucinations. You don't check. All it does is relax you. Really, it's kind of like being mildly drunk without the possibility of hangover. That's all marijuana does. But Dilaudid is possibly, heroin. Now I get it. I'll be honest with you. I understand heroin addicts. That has got to be the single most pleasant drug there is, when you take away all the side effects and the addiction. But you can't take away the side effect and the addiction, so I never did it again. I have never had another shot of Dilaudid. I have never used heroin in my life. And you have to raise your kids. Prohibition isn't going to work. Rationality is. I've had this discussion. I've shared this story with my kids. I've been open and honest about it. Open honesty in a relationship and a discussion, an adult discussion of drugs, is the way to handle it. And to recognize with your kids that if they experiment with drugs, they're not doing anything wrong. They're doing something completely normal. The trick is, don't turn it into addiction. Don't medicate your own self-loathing. If you have a child that for whatever reason seems to manifest the symptoms of addiction, okay, and are in fact self-loathing or have problems they're trying to literally escape from in an unhealthy way, that's a whole different subject, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking to the vast majority of people. When you talk about there are about 50,000 opium-related deaths every year in the United States, that's a terrible thing until you realize there's 340 million people. So comparatively few people, 50,000 to 340 million is a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage. Very few people are dying of opium overdoses. The vast majority of people, even who are using heroin, use it intelligently, or fentanyl, or we fill our people full of so many scary stories. Like if you come in, crack, crystal meth. Crystal meth, I've never done it, okay, but it doesn't last very long. And listen, The U.S. Army used to give it out to the Army Air Corps during World War II to fly long bomber missions so they didn't fall asleep. When Hitler attacked the West, the entire blitzkrieg was fueled by methamphetamine. It was. Look it up. That's an historic fact. Drugs are complicated like every other issue. And we have to learn to have that discussion with our children as, if not adults, because your children obviously are not adults, but not talk to them like they're idiots either, and don't go to prohibition. Don't make the mistakes our culture has. So many problems we have in our culture today from theft and crime and everything else all relate not to drugs, but the prohibition of drugs. Okay? If people were allowed to use drugs and they were all legal, then theft would almost go to nothing because drugs would be cheap and therefore no one would have to break into your house to steal. And violent crime would go to next to nothing for the same reasons, because in an illegal transaction, violence is the only way to settle a dispute. You can't go to court and sue in a drug transaction. But if you made it all legal, you could. And that brings everything out into the sunshine, and then we can talk about things as adults. But having said that, this isn't a political discussion. I don't know if drugs will ever be legal or they won't. But here's the thing. Your kids are going to use them. So you might as well have an adult discussion or an adult level discussion, see if I can think of a different adjective. A balanced discussion, a reasonable discussion, an open discussion of what's good and bad about drugs. And there are things good about them. And letting them know that look, if you want to check out, whether either it's having a cocktail, how many of you out there right now watching me are saying to yourself, oh my God, he's talking about drugs are good, are going to drink how many beers tonight and how many cocktails, and tell me you're any different. And if you think you are, you're a hypocrite, and you're not. Okay, a drug is a drug is a drug. Alcohol is the worst drug of all. It kills. There are 50,000 opiate deaths every year. There are 350,000 alcohol-related deaths every year. Which is the worst drug? Okay, let's not get into the drug discussion or the legalization discussion. Let's get into the adult discussion of drugs, good and bad. There's a time and a place for drugs, like everything else in life. And as long as it's only experimentation and it's not the center of your life where you live to support it, you have no problem and can experiment with drugs, and therefore should do it in a safe and open place. And your kids are going to do it. Accept the reality of it. People have been using drugs one way or the other since Lucy on the African bush back 100 to 200,000 years ago picked up a plant, started chewing the leaves, and found out that she got a little high from it. Okay, I mean, there's nothing new about drug use. Talk to your children like adults. Tell them, look, it's okay to have a couple of drinks. It's not okay to get drunk. It's okay to smoke a little pot. It's not okay to get wasted every day. It's okay to occasionally experiment, even with things like MDMA. Now, at a party, you take a little Molly, you want to get a little friendly with everybody around you, party on. I, by the way, have never used Molly, but I hear that's what happens. It's going to be a harmless experience unless you turn it into an addiction. Drugs are harmless unless you turn it into addiction. The bottom line is this. We have to stop raising our children to believe that life could be a bowl of cherries. It's not going to be a bowl of cherries. And sometimes bad things are going to happen, or a day's going to be just plain hard. And when you get home at the end of that day, you're going to want to check out for a few minutes. And if you want to check out either with, a cocktail or smoking a joint, okay. Just do it in a safe place. Don't drive a car. I'll tell you that right now. That's the big thing I emphasize with my kids, and the reasons that I opened up my house to them and their friends was so that they didn't drive cars. There's nothing wrong with drug use until you start hurting yourself and other people doing it. And the easiest way to do that, to hurt other people, is to drive under the influence of any drug. And so I chose to be open and honest with my kids, to allow them to use marijuana in particular in front of me, and also, by the way, to drink beer. Those same parents. Let me just share with you that, particularly at high school age, my kids went to Catholic high school. And I don't know if you know a lot about Catholic high school, but Catholics love to drink. I mean, it's a stereotype that tends to be, particularly Irish Catholics, but here in Arizona, in Tucson, where I lived, it was mostly Latino Catholics, but whether they're Latino or Irish, they love to drink, okay? It's just part of the culture. And so when there was going to be drinking and keg parties, I would contact all the other parents of all the kids that were going to attend. I would collect all the keys into a basket. I would literally chaperone these parties. I would allow drinking with the parents' permission at the party. I would collect all the car keys. I would not let the kids drive home. And if the party was going to go extra long, I would hire a van to take the kids home if they had to go home that night, and or take them myself, depending on how large the party was and how many kids were involved. It just depended on the party. But my house became a regular place where kids could congregate, and could feel free and safe with the permission of their parents. And when parents said there was no permission, I know who those kids were. And if they showed up at the party, I would turn to them and say simply, your parents simply are not going to allow you to do this. I'm sorry. I'm not going to let you drink, and I'm not going to allow you to drive at this party. And generally they would leave, okay? But over time, that became a non-problem because the kids knew that I wasn't going to, unless I talked to their parents. And if they showed up and I didn't know the kid, I'd say, what's your telephone number so I can call your parents? This is very easy. You call them up and you say, hey, this is Herbie, and your kids are over at my house, and there's a party, and there's a certain amount of beer drinking going on. Is that okay with you? I'm going to confiscate your kids' keys, and I'll make sure they get home safely. I'll drive them myself. Is that okay with you? If it's not okay, tell me now. They won't drink. And the parents, 9 times out of 10, would say, yeah, okay, fine. But if they didn't, then it was no drinking. Simple as that. I respect the position of other people, even if they don't agree with me, something our whole culture would be better off with. Okay, that's where I'm going to leave it today. Now, before we go away, commercial message. For those of you who want a really entertaining read during this time of COVID, it's a coming-of-age story called The Terrarium. I wrote it. It's a novella, which means a short novel. It won't take you long. If you sit down with, a cup of coffee or a glass of beer or a joint and spend a day, you can read it from cover to cover. It's a coming-of-age story of a boy 9 to 13 growing up in the 1960s. And he confronts drug use, homosexuality, not his own, but that of a friend, and how to handle it, his own sexual awakening, race relations. And there were a lot of social things going on in the 60s, which is why I said it there. It was a time of great evolution in our country, and the story is set against that backdrop with this young boy as kind of your navigator and central character throughout this experience. It's a great story. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll want to share it with your friends. It's just a great story, and you can get it 3 ways. Number 1, you can download it to your electronic reader from Amazon. 2, you can get a hard copy if you don't like to read on Kindles or things that are similar. Or 3, if you're an Amazon Prime member, you can download it from the Kindle Lending Library and read it for free. Regardless of how you read it, I'm going to get a little bit of money for that. It's going to help support this podcast, and I hope that you will pick it up. Again, it's the Terrarium. My producer will provide the link below. Also, before you go, make sure you click on the notification button. Here at YouTube, they have an algorithm. YouTube is a search engine, and they have an algorithm that drives the search engine. And until you have approximately 45 episodes in the can, YouTube doesn't think you're serious, and therefore your podcast doesn't go into the search algorithm. Therefore you have, as I have, 5 or 10 people watching a video as opposed to 5 or 10,000 or 5 or 10 million. Consequently, the only way people are going to find this podcast is if you share it. So please, click the subscriber button, click the notification button, and most importantly of all, click the share button and share this podcast with your friends of like mind who might enjoy my rambling on despite. And if you have questions of your own and want to ask them of me, and they don't have to be children related, they can be career related, money related, anything but politics and religion. I'm not going to politics and I'm not going to religion, but I'll discuss everything else. Simply text me above to my other dad at 844-935-0444. It's right above my head. Text me your question. I'll keep it anonymous and I'll answer it in a future podcast. I put these up. I record them every Tuesday and Friday. It takes a day or two for my producer to, polish them up and put them up. But twice a week, these will come up. And if you click the notification button, you'll know. Thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a genuine pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed my rambling. And until next time, this is E.H. Ivins, Uncle Herbie, the dad you wish you had, saying so long.